grab your beverages and turn up your interweb. It's time for the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what is up? Welcome to Week 9 preview episode of the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast. So glad to be back. Sorry we missed out on Week 8. We had to take our bye. Life got in the way. But we are here, ready to rock, feeling good and rested. I'm here with my man, Paul Deal. How you doing, man?
I am doing great. Glad to be back with all of you. Well rested from the bye week last week.
Good. I'm glad to hear. I am feeling the same. My name's Matt McPeek. We are going to spend some time in the beginning part of this episode talking about all the trades that we just saw happen in the past 3 or 4 hours. We are recording on Tuesday night, the 30th of October, on Goosey Night. We're going to talk about all the trades that just happened. We're going to do our Cheers to You, Pour One Out segment. Paul's going to run down the scariest fantasy football lineup of all time. Some pretty interesting names on there. And one defense that just seems to get kicked in the ass every time.
Mm-hmm.
And then this being the Bye NATO week, we got 6 teams on bye. Lots of guys to make sure you keep out of your lineups this week. Make sure you have somebody to replace them with. We're going to run through some guys that you could replace them with. Some of the guys that I have on my team, some of the guys that Paul has on his teams that are on bye. We're going to run down some of their replacements, and of course, I'm going to give you some daily fantasy insight. Some guys that I like. I'm going to give you a lineup that I actually just made about 20 minutes before the episode started. So we are going to get kicked off here talking about, like I said, those trades that happened so far this season. It's been ridiculous. Paul, do you ever remember a deadline? A trading deadline in the NFL being like this?
I never do, and I actually look back to last year, and I start to think of Howie Roseman, and I think that he's almost like the weird initiator of this, because I really don't
trade?
With the J.J. trade.
Yeah.
There was usually never a time that I can remember anyone being traded in the NFL around the trade deadline. Baseball, completely different story.
Right.
Everyone gets excited about trade deadline in baseball, and
Yeah.
football, it would be like, trade deadline happened, no one changed teams.
This guy traded this team traded a 5th round pick for a long snapper or something weird like that. But yeah, I don't ever remember seeing this many, Pro Bowl players being traded in the middle of the season. And it started with Khalil Mack going from the Raiders to the Bears. We've all seen what kind of impact that has had on both the Chicago Bears defense and also, unfortunately, the Oakland Raiders defense. They by far have the worst pass rush in the league, I think. And it continued with the Giants getting rid of 2 big name players. Snacks Harrison going to the Lions. That should really help their 6th worst ranked defense against running backs, at least in fantasy, and that's what we're talking about here. And then the Giants also got rid of Eli Apple, traded him to the Saints. That should help improve the Saints' 2nd worst ranked defense against wide receivers. So, teams are out there making conscious efforts to improve their team mid-season. It's awesome to see. At least on the defensive side, we saw a trade happen with the Packers and the Redskins right before the trade deadline today. We saw Clinton Dix move into the Redskins, which should help. Their defense was already looking pretty good. This was an interesting one to me. They already have a pretty good group of cornerbacks, and they just added another defensive back there to help improve that defense. So.
Did you see this one? Dante Fowler was traded to the Rams.
Yeah, I did see that.
Crazy.
He went for, what was it, a 3rd and a 5th.
Yep.
So to me, that's no good for Cooper Kupp, right? That's got to tell you that they're worried about Cooper Kupp returning, or else, we just saw Josh Reynolds come out in the past 2 weeks. He's had 2 really good games last week, 2 touchdowns. He would be their 4th wide receiver now with Fowler.
Dante Fowler, the defensive end.
Oh.
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah. So the Rams defense went from rich to richer.
Wow.
I don't know if there's a more frightening defensive line in the entire league with Fowler, Sue, Aaron Donald.
Yep. Michael Brockers is no joke. Yeah, wow, dude. That's scary, man. That's really scary. Good for them. But what are the Jaguars doing, man?
I don't know.
Interesting there. Interesting.
Might be a contract year for Fowler.
Yeah, we'll have to look into that a little more. I was completely wrong. Sorry about that, guys. But yeah, let's look at the offensive trade. So, we saw earlier in the season, Josh Gordon going to the Patriots, an absolute freaking steal. Of course, it's the Patriots that pull off a deal like this. They get him for a 5th-round pick. It's absurd. And then on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, we saw Amari Cooper go from the Raiders to the Cowboys for a 1st-rounder. I don't understand that discrepancy there.
Cowboys going to Cowboy.
Yeah. Golden Tate for a 3rd-rounder to the Eagles. That's got no good for Nelson Aguilar owners out there, right? He kind of...
Yeah, we'll see. It'll be interesting to me because I think you have 3 receivers now that could play in the slot with Jordan Matthews, who looked great last week, Nelson, who's played very well in the slot when you look at last year, and now Golden Tate, who's just a high reliability guy that can play, I think, everywhere on the field. So we'll see if they start playing Golden Tate out wide or even putting Nelson out wide. I think having more reliable targets is just going to open the field up for everyone. So not having to force the ball to Ertz or Alshon in the middle of the field anymore. Now having Golden Tate underneath and available, or letting Nelson trying to use some of his speed to get down the field. It'll be interesting. I wouldn't necessarily cut bait with Nelson Aguilar yet, just because I think this might open the field up for him more. Because I think he did play well when we had 2 good receivers last year in Torrey Smith and Alshon Jeffrey. Mm-hmm. And Nelson really solidified himself as that number 3. So I wouldn't cut bait yet, but it'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah, for sure. Then we saw another Pro Bowl wide receiver move from the Broncos to the Texans, Demaryius Thomas for a 4th-round pick. You got to think that this had something to do with the fact that Will Fuller went down with that ACL tear, which is so weird because he went down and he was just sitting there in the end zone, didn't look like he was in any pain whatsoever. I was a Will Fuller owner in a couple of leagues, and I was nervous at first, and then I saw the look on his face, and I said, "Oh, it can't be that bad," but it is. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see his effect on DeAndre Hopkins, and if they keep him in the slot like he had been with the Broncos, or does he stay outside to free up Kiki QT in the slot? That's going to be another group of wide receivers to keep an eye on to see how that kind of shakes out going towards the end of the season. And then the one that me and Paul were kind of laughing about earlier, Ty Montgomery gets traded from the Packers to the Ravens for a 2020 7th-round pick. That pretty much sounds to me like if you can haul it, you can have it kind of trade. Definitely is going to positively affect the 2 running backs in Green Bay, and especially Aaron Jones, who we're going to talk about in a minute in the Cheers to You Pour One Out section. But looking at his effect on the Baltimore backfield, you got to think it's going to chip away a little bit more at Alex Collins, and it's going to maybe take away some of the targets from Javoris Allen. So, is this a move just for backup? Is it, a future thing? Looking at maybe they're deciding they want to go with him instead of Javoris Allen. I don't know. It's going to be a weird one to watch. So, all I can say is, as a big time Alex Collins owner, I'm not happy to see it, but also as a big time Aaron Jones owner, I'm very happy to see it. So, we'll keep an eye on that one for sure. So,
and as an Aaron Rodgers owner, after dealing with last week and watching Montgomery take that kick out first of all, and then fumble it, and not give Aaron Rodgers a chance to go down the field like he is born to do in those situations to either tie or win a game. Happy trails.
Yeah, man. Have fun.
Ty Montgomery.
We are going to move on to the Cheers to You Pour One Out section. Got a lot of guys here that I'm super pumped about because I own quite a few of them. So I'm going to start, like I mentioned earlier, Aaron Jones last week, 12 attempts, 86 yards and a touchdown. He got both of his targets for no yards, but it was still good to see him involved in the passing game there. And although Jamal Williams did kind of vulture a goal line touchdown from him, seeing him get the majority of the work, seeing the Packers finally dedicate some real work to him is pretty awesome to see. And like I said, with Ty Montgomery leaving, that's got to open the door even more for Aaron Jones. So definitely cheers to you, Aaron Jones. You are the man. Next on the cheers to you list is Marlon Mack, another guy I have in a couple of my leagues, and I know, Paul, you said you have him in one of your leagues as well, huh?
I scooped him up off the scrap heap when people started getting scared of his injury, and I saw it out there and guys typically do come back from hamstring injuries. So
At some point, right?
yeah,
Now, this is a dude who has a pretty checkered injury past, although he's only been in the league a couple of years. But hopefully those were just kind of early career nicks and knacks, that they're not, long-term things. But, I mean, 2 straight games with 2 touchdowns, 2 straight games with over 125 rush yards, and 2 straight games of out-targeting Nyheim Hines, who was really one of their focal points, I feel like, especially in the pass game while Marlon Mack was out. He is clearly the number 1 running back in Indianapolis, and hopefully it stays like that. Frank Reich does come from the Philadelphia Eagles last year, where they used, 5 or 6 different running backs throughout the year. So hopefully they kind of stick to Marlon Mack and give him the work. And like we said, hopefully he can stay healthy. Another guy that I'm cheersing to is Mike Evans. 13 targets last week, 179 yards on 6 catches of the touchdown. Fitzpatrick has already been named the starter for the Buccaneers going into Week 9 with Jameis Winston's horrible performance. And if you go back and look at the splits of Mike Evans with Fitzpatrick versus Mike Evans with Jameis Winston this season, it's going to be good having Mike Evans with Fitzpatrick. So
it's really the whole Buccaneer offense too.
Yeah,
they just play a lot better when it comes to Fitzmagic under center.
This is like such an interesting offense because, especially in fantasy, because their defense is absolutely putrid. They have no running game to speak of, although Peyton Barber has come on in the last week or two. We'll talk a little bit about him in part 2 of the podcast, but yeah, it's like, and their offensive line's not really all that great, so they got to throw the ball so much, and that means good things for you Tampa Bay fantasy owners. Another guy that I'm cheersing one to here, but it's kind of hesitant now after hearing this Demaryius Thomas trade, is Jordan Thomas, the tight end for the Texans last week, caught all 4 of his targets for 29 yards and 2 of those goal line touchdowns. They were kind of on scramble plays, broken plays, where Deshaun Watson showed us all why he was a phenom last year. But do we finally have a tight end to speak of in Houston? I think we may be talking about him for the rest of the season, and especially with this Fuller injury, maybe they kind of lean on Jordan Thomas for those middle of the field type routes. So we'll have to keep an eye on that one as well. And here's my last cheers to you. It's Marvin Jones. You were finally relevant after weeks of doing nothing. 7 catches on 10 targets, 117 yards, and 2 touchdowns. We're also cheersing to you because of the fact that Golden Tate is no longer there. And it also a semi-cheers to you to Kenny Golladay because, like we said, with Golden Tate out, it should open the door up for both of these wide receivers to really start performing a little bit more. And we're going to start the pour one out section to Kenny Golladay on the same token there, because he had the 1 catch on 1 target for 12 yards. Not all that great, but like we said, hopefully with Golden Tate being gone, we can see his production start to come out a little bit more. The rest of the pour one out guys, Raheem Mostert, however you want to say it. I feel like he was one of the more highly added running backs this week or this past week. Looking at the prospect of the Breida injury and the fact that it was such a great matchup, they just did nothing. He got 2 attempts, 1 target, only three touches in the game. It's horrible. So I'm definitely pouring some out for you, bro. The next one is T.Y. Hilton. We saw Jack Doyle return and have a great game, and Andrew Luck continuing his tendencies of throwing to every single eligible receiver that is wearing a Colts uniform. He completed a pass to 9 different targets this past week, and unfortunately it seems like T.Y. Hilton is suffering from this dispersion of targets. He was out-targeted by Dontrell Inman. That kind of says a lot. But so I'm pouring one out to you. The next one is C.J. Uzomah. He had the best matchup against tight ends this past week and did absolutely nothing. Was targeted 3 times, didn't catch a ball. So I'm pouring a lot of beer out for you. And the last guys are a pair of Chicago Bears. I'm looking at Tariq Cohen. Yeah, he had that huge 70-yard touchdown catch on a busted play. Well, it wasn't a busted play. It was just awesome play call against the blitz by the Jets. The blitz way too much. Got to stop blitzing so much. But yeah, he only had 3 targets, only had 5 attempts to Jordan Howard's 22 attempts. I thought maybe after the past couple weeks that Tariq Cohen would kind of not take over as the lead back as far as carries go, but at least, a snap count and just touches wise, I thought he'd be way more involved in the pass game, and he wasn't. So, and the last Bear that I want to talk about is Trey Burton. It's been so inconsistent this year. Thought maybe after the past 2 weeks of scoring a touchdown in each game, 2 weeks ago he had the 9 catches on 11 targets for 126 yards and a touchdown, and he follows it up with a stinker with a 3 catch for 18 yards game. No good. So I'm pouring one out for you too, Trey. I was very excited about him coming into the season. I was really disappointed after the draft season. I wasn't able to get him in any of my leagues, but I'm kind of happy that I didn't because he has not looked all that great.
Yeah, he was one of my starting tight ends this week and definitely did put up a stinker. And then unfortunately I had Marvin Jones on the bench with his 30 points in my PPR league. So I'm going to pour one out for myself there with making those 2 blunders from the managerial side. Lastly, I think on the pour one ounce, just the Cleveland Browns in general. That organization just cannot seem to figure it out when it comes to committing to a rebuild or just committing
period.
Right. They can't do it. So fired head coach, fired offensive coordinator. Greg Williams is the head coach.
Get ready to see the most defensive penalties
oh my God.
in the league coming from the Cleveland Browns there with that dude at the helm. Yeah, man, they just I don't get it. Like, you go out and you draft a quarterback, you go on HBO's Hard Knocks, and you have an offensive coordinator and a head coach that don't get along. It's really stupid, man.
Yep. Yeah, it's
like,
bad. But
get your crap together over there, Cleveland.
at least we're not Cleveland fans.
Yeah.
Sorry
true.
to those Cleveland fans out there. Pour one out for yourselves.
It'll get better one day for you guys. One day. So you want to run us through that the scariest lineup in fantasy football history? Some awesome names on there.
Let's do it. So with Halloween right around the corner, hopefully most of you are listening to this today or listening to this on Halloween. So we figured we'd do a little fright-filled mashup of, since 2000, the scariest, most frightful fantasy performances ever. So we have a full roster lined up here for you.
And this is standard scoring, right?
This is standard scoring. So as we get into the receivers,
which makes these numbers even crazier.
You'll understand how these could be even more terrifying. Mike Vick, 2010 versus the Washington Redskins, puts up 49 points. He had 333 yards passing, 4 touchdown passes, 80 yards rushing, and 1 rushing touchdown. That was Mike Vick, 2010, in the Andy Reid Philadelphia Eagles. This was when Donovan McNabb was the quarterback for the Redskins, and Mike Vick just went to town.
So this is Michael Vick 2.0.
Oh yeah,
okay.
This is reinvented Mike Vick.
14 points in the run game.
Yeah, big night for Mike Vick. Then we're going to jump down to our 2 running backs. We have in this fright-filled lineup Clinton Portis when he was with the Broncos and Sean Alexander who was on the Seahawks. Clinton Portis against the Chiefs. Remember the Chiefs as we go through this. Clinton Portis against the Chiefs in 2003 hung 54 points on them. That's 4 points.
54.
I scored 92 in one of my games this week. Clinton Portis scored. If he was on my team, that would have been more than half my points. This game that he put up 54 points, he had 254 total yards and 5 total touchdowns. It was the 5th week in a row he had over 100 yards rushing the ball. Jumping down now to Sean Alexander, 2002. I don't know what was in the water for running backs in the early 2000s, but Sean Alexander put up...
That's when football, you were allowed to actually... That's when people played real freaking football.
You could hit people and run them over?
Yeah. You were allowed to actually lower your helmet as a running back. Ridiculous.
So Sean Alexander puts up 52 points on the Minnesota Vikings with 231 yards, total yards, and 5 total touchdowns. So him, Clinton Portis, getting it done, running the ball, catching the ball, and obviously they found the end zone a lot with 10 touchdowns between the two of them. Now we're going to jump down to our 2 wide receivers. This is a name from the past. Jimmy Smith, wide receiver on Jacksonville, versus the Baltimore Ravens in 2000. Jimmy Smith scored in a standard league 47 points on 15 catches, 291 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So, yes, that's correct. It would be a 62-point performance in a PPR lineup. Absolute fright-filled.
Ridiculous.
Eric Decker, 2013, versus, you guessed it, the Kansas City Chiefs. 41 points on 8 catches, 174 yards, and 4 touchdowns. That was when Decker was on the Broncos and Peyton was on the Broncos.
And Peyton Manning was Omaha and everybody into 5 touchdowns a game.
Absolutely. It was before that Super Bowl against the Panthers where Peyton couldn't even throw the ball because his arm was so dead. This was when the Sheriff still had something in the cannon.
He threw out his arm in that season.
Yeah. Maybe in this game
Yeah.
with all the points that Decker put up fantasy-wise. Tight end now, Shannon Sharp. You know it. It's the Kansas City Chiefs in 2002.
You had the Chiefs. You were right.
Not a good decade for the Chiefs there. But Shannon Sharp, as a tight end, puts up 33 total points on 12 catches, 214 yards, and 2 touchdowns.
214 yards from a tight end.
I'm a tight end.
In what, 2006?
2002.
Two.
Yeah, that was when tight ends were still supposed to just stand at the end of the line and be an extra lineman and block for the running backs, like Clinton Portis, who puts up 54 points the next year against those same Kansas City Chiefs. Our kicker is going to be Rod Baronis. And we've all seen a lot of big numbers, I think, from the Greg Zerlines of the world and Justin Tuckers. Rod Baronis had one of the most incredible months of this season in October. I think it was 2007. He was 12 for 13 on field goals throughout the entire month, and that includes in one game 8 field goals and 2 for 2 on extra points. So we did the math. That would have been 24 points in that game against the Texans. So Rod Baronis is our scariest fantasy kicker to tell you all about tonight. Our defense, just to close out this lineup of terrifying fantasy performances, we have Seattle's defense against my Philadelphia Eagles in 2005. The Seattle defense and special teams put up 46 points on 2 fumble recoveries, 4 interceptions, 4 sacks, and 3 touchdowns. And that was the night I'm pretty sure the Eagles retired like Reggie White's number, and it was supposed to be a nice night for the fans and like big halftime thing. Probably was on primetime either Monday night or Sunday night, and the Seattle Seahawks just had no respect and embarrassed the team right off the field.
I wonder how that game, that performance by the Seattle DST compared to their performance against Peyton in that Super Bowl.
Yeah.
When they had, I think it was 2 special teams touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
I know they had at
kick
least
return.
one punt. I know they had at least 1 pick six. They had all kinds of turn. That was a crazy game.
Yeah, this was well before the Legion of Boom, too. I
think that was a little bit. You said how many? 40-something points?
46 points.
46 points from your defense.
Out of a defense.
Oh, my gosh. That would be freaking awesome.
I could have just started Clinton Portis and Seattle's defense last week and beaten my fantasy score that I put up.
I bet you the Falcons this year don't even finish the season with 46 fantasy points.
Yeah.
Their defense is absolutely atrocious. When you hear us do the preview for the Falcons game, you'll understand how bad this defense is. Holy crap!
So don't let that haunt your nightmares about. Hopefully, none of you experienced or were on the receiving end of any of those big numbers by any of those players that we mentioned. But that puts a wrap on the scariest fantasy football lineups ever. And hopefully, you'll be on the positive side of the next scariest performance ever.
Very cool. Well, thanks for bringing that up this week. It's pretty awesome. As we mentioned earlier, this week there are 6 teams on bye. We got the Cardinals, Bengals, Colts, Jaguars, Eagles, and Giants. Lots and lots of fantasy players are going to be on bye this week that you're not going to be able to play in your lineup. So I figured we could take a minute, run down some of the guys of note and some of the guys that maybe me and Paul have on our teams that we are replacing them with. So, Paul, if you have anybody, and if you want to just jump in at any point, feel free. Starting with the Cardinals, really the only 3 players I see valuable there is David Johnson. I'm thinking Chiefs defense. Yeah, David Johnson, Larry Fitzgerald, and Christian Kirk. I actually don't own any of these guys in any of my leagues. But if you're looking for a wide receiver this week, I think definitely check the waiver wire for Cortland Sutton, because now with Demaryius Thomas gone, that dude, we've already seen him getting like a lot of red zone targets. I don't know if it's the majority, but definitely a lot of them, and he's definitely going to be the number 2 there. So he's definitely worth a pickup. And like I said, Kiki QT, that he should be helped by both the injury to Will Fuller, unfortunately, and also the trade of Demaryius Thomas. So if you're trying to replace one of these wide receivers that we mentioned throughout this segment, I would very much focus on those 2 guys. Going to the Bengals, I have Andy Dalton in 2 of my leagues. He screwed me in a couple weeks, and he helped me last week, but I'm replacing him in 1 league with, hopefully, if my claim goes through, Ryan Fitzpatrick. But also I think not a bad replacement considering all the QBs that are on bye is Alex Smith this week. He's got not a bad matchup at all going against. I'm pretty sure they're the ones playing Tampa Bay. Is it? I don't know. We'll get to that, but Joe Mixon is out. AJ Green is out. Tyler Boyd is out. And actually, there was I saw a little news clip. AJ Green was spotted walking in a boot today, so no good there. But with a bye week, maybe they're just.
Yeah, it's good to have the bye.
Yeah, for sure.
Get some rest.
So for me, I have Mixon in one of my league. Actually, in a league, I have all 3 of those players: Dalton, Mixon, and Green in my one standard league in a Yahoo league. So I'm replacing Mixon with Aaron Jones, and I'm replacing Green with Doug Baldwin. I don't own AJ Boyd, but like I said, there's 2 wide receivers on the waiver wire you can check out in Sutton and QT. The Colts are also on bye. So you got to replace Andrew Luck. You got Jack Doyle just returned, and Eric Ebron. So 2 big time tight ends that are going to be out, and you got the combo of Marlon Mack and Naheem Hines. I got Mack in 1 league. I'm replacing him with Alex Collins. Who are you thinking about replacing Marlon Mack with this week? What's your depth looking like?
I have terrible running back depth in that league.
Well, I'll give you a second to check that out because there's also another big name in this game that's obviously not going to play, and that's T.Y. Hilton. We talked about him. We poured one out for him, but he's still the number 1 target there for Andrew Luck, and that says a lot. But this week you got to replace him. So again, look at those wide receivers that are available, and then you got with the Jacksonville Jaguars. I feel like really the only if you've been struggling this season, you've been playing those wide receivers. I hope you haven't, but. Obviously, the Fournette-Yeldon combo, both of them are not going to be playing. The reports are apparently that Fournette is going to try and be able to play after this bye. We'll see if that actually happens. One thing that happened last week that obviously we weren't able to cover, one of these trades that we missed, actually, Carlos Hyde going to the Jacksonville Jaguars. So if Fournette is out, I don't know how comfortable you would be picking up and starting Carlos Hyde if he was dropped in a league after his absolute putrid performance in his first game. I think he had 11 carries for like 2 yards or something. And
that is where I'm at with Marlon Mack, since I really have no good depth on my team. A lot of my guys are on bye, or they're guys that I've taken basically injury flyers on, like a Darren Sproles, hoping he can come back after the Eagles bye and add something of value to a running back core that is really just whoever the hot hand is going to get the ball. So I'm going to see what the waiver wire shakes out in, see if there's any running backs that I think have value that have been dropped. Otherwise, it's just going to be trying to play the best matchup I can to replace Marlon Mack.
Right. Yeah. And don't be throwing away guys on bye to pick up somebody that you're only going to play for 1 week, unless you're in a situation where, you're 3-5 and you need a win really bad. I can understand that, but be careful. Don't get too ambitious with your drops this week. It's important to replace these guys on bye, but you drafted depth for a reason. So if you have a guy sitting on your bench that maybe doesn't have the greatest matchup, maybe has a better shot at scoring a touchdown over some waiver wire guy, don't be afraid to play those guys that you drafted. You drafted them for a reason. So stick to your guys if you have to. The last 2 teams on bye, we got 2 NFC East teams, the New York Football Giants. So you got to replace Barkley, Odell, Sterling Shepard, Evans if you have them. Fortunately for me, I don't have any of these guys in my league. Well, unfortunately, I don't have Barkley. But, with this the defense getting rid of two big time players. The Giants look like a mess, man. And in a PPR league, I think it's the only situation where Barkley gets a bump up because of the situation that they're in, because he's going to be catching even more passes than he already does. But their team just as a whole just looks like absolute garbage.
It's bad. It's bad up there in New York, and pretty embarrassing for them. But I mean, if you have Odell again, you can look at some of these receivers that come from the traded teams or guys that were traded above them. Kenny Golladay is someone that might be out there or on your bench. And Marvin Jones, I already told you he was on my bench. I'm sure there's someone else out there that had him on a bench. And now he should be a starter.
And before we get to the Eagles, real quick, on last thing on the Giants, there's been rumors. I listen to New York Sports Talk Radio. I'm a Jets and a Mets fan, unfortunately. But, there's been reports that they're considering a QB change and this and that. But then I saw a report this morning that their backup quarterback, the guy that they'd be considering replacing Eli with, got arrested for a traffic violation this morning. So I don't know what you do to get arrested for a traffic violation, but he obviously did something really stupid. So I wouldn't be too worried if you're an Odell owner about hearing the talks that Giants might make a QB switch. So don't get too, if somebody's trying to make a trade with you and try and snipe Odell from you, give it a real long good look before you make that trade, before you hit accept. And lastly, with the Eagles on bye, obviously you got Carson Wentz, Zach Ertz. If you've been playing Dallas Goedert, Alshon Jeffrey, if you've been a Nelson Aguilar owner, if you've been riding with any of those running backs with Smallwood or Clement. So make sure you have a replacement for them. In two of the leagues that I have Zach Ertz, I did not prepare myself well enough for this bye week. I'm actually in trade talks with one guy who has Trey Burton and David Njoku. Trying to get my hands on Njoku for the week, but I don't want to give up too much because, like I said, it's only going to be a 1 week replacement thing. So I offered him. He started off with an offer of Njoku for my Marlon Mack. I said that's too much, so I countered him. If he wants to give me Nick Chubb and David Njoku, I'd be willing to give him Marlon Mack and either Marquise Goodwin or Chris Godwin. So I feel like it's not a bad trade. In that league, I'm 4-4. I'm right on the cusp of being in the playoffs, and I want to make sure I put up a good number in my tight end spot. That's my 0 RB league where I'm really counting on receptions and receiving yards in the full PPR format. So that does it for the bye week, guys. It's quite a few there, so make sure you are paying attention and make sure you replace those guys. And even if you're in a losing team, if you're 2-6. Please don't be that jerk.
Fighting.
Yeah, don't be the jerk that leaves two guys on bye in your team and gives an automatic win for somebody that's fighting for a playoff spot or one of these top tier teams that just going to give an easy win. Keep fighting, stay in it. Don't be the jerk, or else hopefully your commissioners hard nosed and will kick you out of the league for that. Because I'm in a league. I started a league at work and I got a dude who's already, I think it's been 3 weeks, where he's either played a guy that's hurt or played a guy that's out. So Michael
Deuces.
Spann, next year you're out, bro. Sorry, no shot.
Not even going to get a pour one out. You don't deserve it.
Yeah, I'm not even wasting beer on you. So I want to move over to our daily fantasy spot real quick, just for all you daily fantasy players out there. I gotten into it this season. It's a lot of fun. I have 6 leagues. 3 of them I'm winning. 3 of them I'm not. So in those 3 leagues that I'm not winning, if I only had 1 or 2 leagues this year and I wasn't doing great, I'd be all over the daily fantasy stuff because it's a lot of fun. So looking at quarterbacks this week, I really like Jared Goff's matchup. He's for 8,400. Not expensive, not cheap, right in the middle. Not a bad spot for a QB. And the other one is Cam Newton, also has an awesome matchup. Mm-hmm. He's 8,600. So like I said, not expensive but not cheap either, right in the middle.
Cam plays really well at home too. So
yeah. And I think they're the ones playing Tampa Bay, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So
Carolina and Tampa Bay.
It doesn't get better as a matchup there, and you're going to hear quite a few Carolina Panthers in my daily fantasy lineup here. At running back, I got Christian McCaffrey as I'm sticking with that game. 7,900 for a running back that's going to. Last week he caught a touchdown, ran a touchdown, 18 carries, had an awesome game. The next one is Aaron Jones. As I said, cheers to you. I'm happy about him. He's in a great situation now. The Patriots are horrible against the run. They just traded away one of their 3 running backs, so he should see a lot more work. So he's in a great situation, and he's for only $5,800. I feel like that's probably going to be one of the best values in FanDuel this week. Looking at some alternate running backs, maybe if you need some cheaper options, Nick Chubb, as we said, Carlos Hyde's gone. And, he's obviously the lead back there. He's got fresh legs because he hasn't really been used in the first half of the season. And then 2 guys that you kind of have to keep an eye on because of injury situations. You got Latavius Murray. If Dalvin Cook is out again, $6,700 for Latavius Murray against I can't think of who the Vikings are playing, but I'm pretty sure
Vikings are playing the Lions.
Yeah, another awesome matchup. The Lions are horrible against the run. That's why they went out and traded for Snacks Harrison. So, like I said, if Dalvin Cook is out, I think $6,700 is a steal for what will be a number 1 running back. By the way, Nick Chubb is $6,600, so pretty cheap. And then an even cheaper option, especially FanDuel is PPR format, and if Chris Thompson suits up and if he can play, he's another great play. He's got a good matchup there as well. So that does it for some running backs. As far as wide receivers, going along with this whole injury situation, and the cool thing about the FanDuel stuff is, you can go in and set a roster like I just did Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday night. Once they put out the values of guys, and then come Sunday morning, if certain guys are out or other guys are they're suspended or guys are whatever, the dollar values don't change. So. Looking at Sammy Watkins for $6,700, if Tyreek Hill misses any time with this groin injury of his, Sammy Watkins in that offense being the number 1 target as far as wide receivers go for $6,700 is a steal. Another one is Julian Edelman. He's just looked great so far coming back. Another guy with fresh legs. Yeah, he's coming off of an ACL, but he had off for the first 4 weeks of the season, and he's come in and obviously become the same player that he's been with Tom Brady, the number 1 target for Tom Brady. Maybe not this year because of what James White has done, but he's got a great matchup against Green Bay, $7,300. Not bad for a wide receiver. That's going to probably get 8 to 10 targets. And another guy, especially keeping the PPR format in mind, is Jarvis Landry. $6,600 for Jarvis Landry. He's going up against that Kansas City defense that can't stop anybody in the pass game. Is another guy who's probably going to get 8 to 10 targets again. He's a great value. So I like Jarvis Landry. Some alternate wide receivers, Robert Woods for $7,600 against New Orleans. And then you got a pair of Dolphins wide receivers. Devontae Parker came in last week and really showed out. He's for $5,800. You got Danny Amendola for $5,400. Threw that touchdown. He actually threw more touchdown passes than Brock Osweiler did last week. And then you got a pair of Carolina Panther wide receivers going along with that whole matchup that the Panthers have against Tampa Bay. You got DJ Moore for $5,300, Devin Funchess for $6,400. So that's 2 pretty good values at wide receiver. At tight end, I'm going cheap this week. With a lot of these, with Zach Ertz out, he's the most consistent tight end by far. Maybe Travis Kelce have something to say about that, but I feel like tight end's one position that you can pay down at and get close to top dollar production. Travis Kelce goes out and has a 6 catch for 80 yards and a touchdown game. Yeah, obviously that's a huge game. But if my guy Chris Herndon with the New York Jets, if he goes out and has 3 or 4 catches for 50 yards and a touchdown, you're saving I think a couple $1,000 in daily fantasy, which is a lot for a guy that a touchdown's a touchdown. So he's got a great matchup against Miami, who's absolutely horrible against tight ends, and 3 straight games for Chris Herndon with a touchdown. So seems like he's kind of become maybe that red zone target for the Jets and for rookie quarterback Sam Darnold. For my flex spot this week, super excited about this guy because of, again, these trades that's been going on, is Kerryon Johnson for $6,400. With Minnesota's defense not being anything like it was last year, he should see a lot more work in the pass game with Golden Tate leaving. So I'm excited about Kerryon Johnson. And last but not least, your suicide pick of the week for sure is the Chicago Bears DST facing the Nathan Peterman-led Buffalo Bills, who this dude gives out interceptions like Oprah gives out cars. This is going to be probably a very ugly game for Nathan Peterman. But then again, we did say that about the Bills going into Minnesota a couple weeks ago, and they absolutely blew out the Vikings. So anything can happen.
The Bills just did sign Terrell Pryor as well today, as reported by Adam Schefter.
Did they? Okay, so they're picking up the scraps from my Jets.
We'll see. I mean, I don't think it really adds any help to them because it's still Nathan Peterman that has to get them the ball.
And he's hurt anyway. Apparently he's going to miss another 3 or 4 weeks, but he's got a groin injury himself. So lots of injuries this year, man. Hamstrings and groins and all kinds of crap. So got an interesting year so far with injuries. Let's jump right into the Thursday night game. It is a AFC West versus NFC West showdown of the Battle of the Bay teams.
Toilet bowl.
Yeah. Raiders playing the 49ers. So players that I like in this game, obviously Derek Carr coming off of a great game with 3 touchdowns and 245 yards. He targeted 7 different players. That's Andrew Luck style. And, he's coming off of the bye week. Or were they coming off a bye? Yeah. Raiders were on a bye last week. Yeah. So coming off a bye, had extra time to prepare. And, no, I'm sorry. The Raiders are not coming off a bye.
No, they played the Colts last week.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yep. But, with all these quarterbacks on bye, maybe he's a bye week replacement for you going up against this 49ers defense that gives up the 9th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Doug Martin looked great with beast mode being gone now. He had 13 attempts and 2 targets, caught both of them, had just about 90 total yards. He did fumble the ball, which is not going to make Gruden all that happy, but and Jalen Richard also looked great, in the whole PPR thing that he's obviously way more value in, caught 8 of 8 targets for 50 yards. And Jared Cook, another guy that I would start this week, had caught 4 of his 5 targets last week for 75 yards and a touchdown. I think he benefits the most from Amari Cooper leaving.
Yeah,
we saw last week with their receivers not really taking a step up with Amari being gone. I think Jared Cook really benefits there. And on the 49er side of the ball, apparently C.J. Beathard is in
potentially out this week. He's going to be a game time decision. It looks like.
Was it a concussion? Right.
I think so.
Yeah. But I mean, if he does play, the Raiders aren't good, but they're not bad against the pass either. And like I said, with all these quarterbacks, it was really just the 3 big name quarterbacks, Wentz and Luck and Dalton being out. But if you need a quarterback really badly, if you're in a big league, maybe C.J. Beathard's not the worst.
It's a wrist injury for C.J. Beathard. So we'll see. I don't know if it's his throwing hand or not, but if he is ruled out, they will be in pretty tough shape quarterback-wise. So then I would say if Derek Carr is available or on your bench, he is probably the one to start because it should be all Raiders in that game if C.J. Beathard can't go.
Then you look at these running backs. We already talked about Raheem Mostert. Like I said, huge disappointment. And then Matt Breida. This dude is tough, man. It seems like every week he leaves in the middle of the game with something new, broken or battered on him.
Yeah.
He wasn't targeted in the game at all, but he did carry the ball 16 times last week for 42 yards, which is a lot for a running back that's, like we said, dealing with what seems like an injury in every appendage of his body. This past week against Arizona, it was weird that he wasn't targeted at all in a Kyle Shanahan-led offense, but I'm sure that will change going forward with him getting healthier, hopefully. And then George Kittle, you can play him, obviously. The Titans, they do give up the 10th fewest fantasy points to tight ends, but he is probably the focal point of that offense. Him and Marquise Goodwin, obviously, who had a big game. Not really a big game, just one big catch for 53 yards and a touchdown, but that touchdown definitely helped out a lot. The one guy on here that's really a puzzle to me is this kid, Kendrick Bourne. 7 catches for 10 targets for 71 yards. Maybe he's another one of these bye week replacement wide receivers. The Raiders do give up the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers, so like I said, with defenses focusing a lot on George Kittle and Marquise Goodwin, maybe this opens things up for Kendrick Bourne. Maybe they have found another wide receiver too to go with Goodwin. So
if you need help on bye week, it doesn't hurt to take a flyer. The Thursday night games so far have been pretty wild games in terms of scoring. So it seems like there's a lot to go around on Thursday night in the scoring department.
And speaking from a guy that has a defensive back for the Raiders in my all IDP league, that defense, they've been sitting dudes that were high round draft picks, and they're playing dudes only, a couple snaps a game. I don't know what they are doing with their pass defense. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that they can't generate any semblance of a pass rush because they decided to trade Khalil Mack away. So play the dude on the 49ers that just had a big game. Maybe you can ride that stream there. Moving on to the Chargers at the Seahawks. Chargers coming off of a bye. And before I let you take this one on, I just want to drop this Russell Wilson stat real quick. I don't know if any Russell Wilson owners out there, you probably have come to realize this, but he is on an absolutely insane efficiency rate. So last week he threw 3 touchdowns on 17 pass attempts. That's 1 every 5.5 attempts. In week 7, he threw a touchdown on every 7.6 attempts. And the week before that, he threw a touchdown on every 7 attempts.
Man.
So the dude has had 9 touchdowns over the past 3 weeks, throwing under 20 times each game.
Yeah.
That's it's pretty good.
That sounds like a Russell Wilson-led Seahawks offense if I've ever heard of one.
It's just weird because, he's only eclipsed 250 passing yards once this season, and his rushing numbers are significantly down from his career averages. In his career, he's averaged about 550 rush yards a year, and this season he only has 77 rush yards through 7 games. So he is on a about a 25% rate compared to his career. Yep. So definitely not good at all. But what do you got for this game, Paul?
Yeah, we'll see. This is an interesting one, as every game always is in the NFL. On the Chargers side,
Ain't that true?
It's too much sometimes. We can't just get a little bit of consistency and know what we're going to get every week from our guys. The Chargers side, I'm definitely starting Melvin Gordon. The Seahawks are allowing the second fewest fantasy points, I'm looking at the Seahawks are allowing the second fewest points to QBs, the third fewest points to tight ends, and the 10th fewest to wide receivers. That's why I'm not telling you about Phillip Rivers, Keenan Allen, Antonio Gates, or whoever they're going to use at tight end. The Seahawks have a pretty good defense, so Melvin Gordon is really the only guy I'm convinced on starting here. If you need bye week help, then sure, continue to play Keenan Allen or play a Phillip Rivers. But if you really want to look at matchups here, they might not be your best plays going into this week. On the Seattle side of the ball, the Chargers are in the top 5 for points allowed to wide receivers and quarterbacks. So Russell Wilson and how efficient he's been, he is definitely playing. Tyler Lockett, Doug Baldwin, I'm playing both of those guys. They did just release Brandon Marshall as well, so he's not on the team anymore, clogging up or complicating the receiving room there. They had an interesting guy that I'm keeping my eye on after last week on the Seahawks. David Moore led the team in receiving with 4 targets, 4 receptions, 97 yards, and a touchdown. Obviously, there's not a lot of huge numbers coming out of the passing game in terms of target share, but the ball's finding its way into the end zone. People are getting yards. They're moving the ball. So David Moore, potentially someone you could take a flyer on, considering he led the team last week, but he led the team with 4 targets. People had 3 and 2 right behind him, so it's not like one of these other more high-powered offenses where you see someone with 15 targets and the next closest has 7 or 8.
Right.
This guy's only leading by a target or 2 here or there. So Russell Wilson is finding the open man and getting it to them. And there's a good matchup this week for quarterbacks and receivers if you have anyone on Seattle playing them against the Chargers. The Chargers are also in the top 10 for points allowed to tight ends. So if you want to look at like a Nick Vannett or someone like that, if you need some tight end help, that could be another interesting Seattle Seahawk to start. But again, the way targets are going and the way the offense is moving, it's going to be hard to tell who's going to get the tight end or who's going to get the touchdown and where most of the yards are going to end up going. On the Chargers side, I already talked about it. Rivers and Allen might not be your best matchups considering the defense that Seattle has against some of the wide receivers and quarterbacks they've played so far. You look at Marvin Jones, and you can feel positive that he did put up big numbers. So if you're impacted by Mageddon this week and you don't have a lot of depth on your team, I'm still going to play a Keenan Allen or a Phillip Rivers. But again, if you have the luxury of having depth this week because not a lot of guys are on bye, look into some of those other matchups that you might have.
Yeah, so in summary, the Chargers defense is bad and the Seahawks defense is good. Start your Seahawks, and if you can, sit your Chargers, but by NATO is probably not allowing too many people that luxury. Next game is another AFC West game. We got the Chiefs going to Cleveland to play the Browns with their new offensive coordinator and new head coach. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes is a beast. Anyone who has him has him locked into their QB spot. 7 straight games with 300-plus passing yards. Pretty insane. The big one in this game, I feel like, is the injury of Ty Hill and how much of an impact that's going to have on all of the other pass catchers for the Chiefs. Obviously, Sammy Watkins stands to see a lot more targets. And with Ty Hill going down halfway through the fourth quarter, Sammy Watkins still had 9 targets throughout that game with 2 touchdowns over 100 yards. Mm-hmm. So he had a good game even with Ty Hill on the field. So, if he's out again, I think Watkins can have a huge game. And also their other wide receiver, Conley, he could see a big uptick in production. If he's the number 2 wide receiver, a number 2 wide receiver on this Chiefs offense is probably as good as a number 1 wide receiver on most other offenses. So if maybe that's another bye week replacement wide receiver that you can target on the waiver wire. I doubt very many people have been rostering Conley throughout the season. Obviously, Travis Kelce stands to see a little uptick in targets as well. Last week had 10 of them, 79 yards and a touchdown. He's another one of these locked-in players. And then Kareem Hunt, you're obviously going to start. 86 total yards last week with a touchdown. Had over 20 touches. So he's awesome. You're playing him. On the Browns, you can pretty much play all your Browns as well because the Chiefs' defense is absolutely horrible. They're giving up the 7th most fantasy points to quarterbacks, the 3rd most to running backs, and the 6th most to tight ends. They are also giving up the 2nd most receiving yards and the 2nd most receptions allowed to running backs. So maybe this is a game where they finally get Duke Johnson involved. Previous head coach Hugh Jackson had been saying it for how long? We got to get this dude more involved. Got to get this dude more involved. But if there's ever been a game to do it, this is the one. And obviously, also Nick Chubb is a good play this week as well. 2 straight games with 18 carries, had 65 yards last week, added another 10 yards on 2 catches from 3 targets. He is definitely going to become, at some point, probably a low-end RB1, high-end RB2, especially this week with all the guys on bye.
It's an offense to pay attention to as well because you got a head coach change, you got an offensive coordinator changing. Yep. They can potentially be taking on an entirely new look, that Browns offense. I think people have been waiting to see what Baker Mayfield can do and if he's going to turn into an exciting player or potentially quarterback 2 option for bye weeks and things like that. Njoku had 0 points last week, so looking for him to have a big response this week, especially in a good matchup. And, the Cleveland Browns are a talented football team. They just have not been able to put it together. So let's see if a little shakeup in the coaching department can really help that offense kickstart itself and start playing like some people want it to.
I'm surprised that with all these wide receivers that were moved at the trade deadline that the Browns weren't a little more involved. I figured maybe, with them, what seems like their wide receiver 2 spot has been a revolving door all season. I figured maybe they would be one of those teams to go out and try and get one of those bona fide wide receivers, but they did not. So maybe that says something about how they feel about Antonio Callaway, who had a touchdown with 36 yards, 5 catches on 6 targets last week. Again, another one of these bye week replacement wide receiver 2s. If you're hurting for a wide receiver, I think he's not a bad option considering the matchup that he has against the Kansas City Chiefs this week. Next is another AFC West team. They're home against the Houston Texans, who are going to look a lot different on offense with Demaryius Thomas. That is a scary offense now, man. I mean, not
It's
saying
crazy.
that it wasn't scary with Will Fuller, but you have two massive wide receivers.
Yeah.
And one of them, DeAndre Hopkins, who is an absolute monster.
He catches everything thrown to him, and it's some of the most ridiculous catches I've ever seen. Like, everyone likes to focus on OBJ and what he does, and don't get me wrong, OBJ can catch with the best of them, but DeAndre Hopkins, he's so long, everything just sticks to him. He has the most ridiculous body motions once he catches the ball, and I'm pretty grateful he's on my fantasy team.
And after he catches the ball, he looks different than every other wide receiver.
Yep.
Like he's not as like thick as Julio. You know, he's maybe not as fast as a Ty Hill or whatever. But when he gets the ball, he just looks like an absolute beast. He's awesome.
No question. So if he's on your roster, you're absolutely starting DeAndre Hopkins. On the Denver side, I am going to be starting, if he's on my team, Phillip Lindsay again. This is based on a lot of the bye week talk that we've had going on, and then also for the fact that there really hasn't been anyone super reliable on the Denver side of the football. The Texans and the Broncos both have pretty decent, if not above average, fantasy defenses. So they're not letting up a lot of points to different position players. That's why I'm really looking at who are the reliable guys, who can we count on to really get a share of targets and offense. And that's why DeAndre Hopkins and Phillip Lindsay are my two guys from the Texans and Denver. Other Texans that are just on my radar to watch out for. Deshaun Watson is coming off a huge game last week on Thursday night, so he's had extra time to prepare. But this will be his first trip to Mile High Stadium, and that's a place that obviously has a big home field advantage. Players play a lot differently there if they're not used to the altitude. So we'll see how Deshaun Watson in his first trip there can perform. They're an offense that's, I think, predicated on passing the football, and really it flows through Deshaun Watson. So again, he's not someone I'm too afraid to start, but it'll be interesting to see what he does in this trip to Denver. Kiki Kute, when I was writing this earlier today, I was really excited for him stepping in if he's healthy in the absence of Will Fuller, thinking he's going to get all of those targets. And then right before I came here, I see the Demaryius Thomas trade has gone through. I would still be a little surprised if Demaryius Thomas saw serious playing time this week. I think it's just asking a lot for him to turn around the offense so quickly and be able to go in and run most of the plays and understand the verbiage and things like that. So,
but at the same time, I mean, I feel like for wide receivers, especially veteran wide receivers, I mean, a stick route's a stick route,
Sure.
a go route's a go route.
Sure.
So as long as Watson can say, you know, you got to hitch this, you got to, you know, you got an out, you got to run a 20-yard seam, whatever. And the fact that it's, I mean, has there ever been a revenge game like this where you get traded and,
Right.
and 3 days later you're playing your old team?
Immediately playing the team.
Pretty awesome.
So it will be interesting to see what Demaryius Thomas does, how much he's utilized. I absolutely expect they'll put him on the field unless it's announced that he's not going to play at all. And you'll think that they'll try and get him the ball on a deep route or something close to the end zone where they just force the ball to him and see if he can come down with it like the receiver he used to be in years past. Right. So keep an eye on him and just how much they start talking about using him this first week. Otherwise, I would say Kiki Kute is someone you could look to step in and fill some of the target share for Will Fuller right away if he's healthy. The Broncos are actually letting up the 9th most points to running backs. Lamar Miller is someone I still have a hard time trusting. I think he's been on our Get Your Ass to the Bench segment a couple times this week, or a couple times this year. So he did have a big night against the Dolphins, which was a revenge game for him. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if he's necessarily going to do the same in this Broncos matchup, but if Lamar Miller's on your team, if you have guys on buys, he has a pretty decent matchup against these Broncos. Lastly, on the Broncos side of the ball, you're really stuck because the Texans have a really good defense. But you can use a guy like Sanders. You can use Phillip Lindsay. And now Courtland Sutton is the locked-in number 2 receiver. I think we've started to see over the course of this year, and talked about it earlier in some other episodes, that he was actually starting to cut into the targets of a Demaryius Thomas, especially as the number 3 receiver.
Especially the red zone targets.
Yeah. So I think he has a good rapport with Case Keenum. I think now that Demaryius Thomas is gone, it's completely up to Courtland Sutton to take advantage of this opportunity. And he was already starting to do it when Demaryius was on the team. So whether you have Courtland Sutton already, if not, put a waiver claim in for him and try and get him now, because whether or not he performs in this matchup, he's got some good ones coming up, and he's going to be their number 2 receiver.
And I mean, as much as we want to say about John Elway's history of drafts, hasn't really done all that well, but for a Hall of Fame quarterback to to give away a wide receiver of Demaryius Thomas's caliber, he has to feel very confident in Courtland Sutton, that Courtland Sutton can step right into a wide receiver 2 role, and I think he can do that. So, I'm trying to get Sutton in every one of my leagues. If he's available, I'm putting in a claim for him, because I think he's got all the talent in the world, and he's going to get the opportunity for sure.
Now he's got it.
So the last game that we have for this part 1 of the podcast is what I think will be the barn burner of the week. It is the last of the Western Division teams. We got the Los Angeles Rams playing the New Orleans Saints. Jared Goff, as I mentioned in my DFS segment, he's the quarterback I'm going to pick in most of my DFS lineups. He's got an awesome matchup against the Saints, who give up the 3rd most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Had another 3-touchdown game last week. He looks great. He's obviously not affected by the Cooper Kupp injury as much as some people thought he might be.
Who might be coming back this week too.
Oh, true, yeah. So, and we talked about that defense. Jesus, they just got another pass rusher. It's insane, man. And obviously Todd Gurley, he's a lock. Brandon Cooks and Robert Woods, both awesome wide receivers. Brandon Cooks last week, 70 yards on 7 targets. Brandon Cooks also had 7 targets, turned him into 81 yards and a touchdown, including a 32-yard bomb. So the Saints are not only giving up the 3rd most fantasy points to quarterbacks, but they're also giving up the 2nd most to wide receivers. So I think you can very confidently play either one of those wide receivers. And also this kid, Josh Reynolds, if Cooper Kupp does miss again, like I said, he had 2 touchdowns last week, 42 yards. Definitely playable with all these teams on bye. So if you have Rams, play him. And on the Saints side of the ball, Drew Brees is a beast. Did have a very weird game for him last week, though. Yeah, they got the win, but on 23 pass attempts, he only had 120 yards, which was probably one of the lower, yards per attempt numbers of his career. I would imagine. Did have a touchdown, but he also had an INT. So one of the lower scoring games for him. And then you look at the 2 running backs. So they each got 13 carries. I'm talking Kamara and Ingram here. Ingram was able to produce more yardage, 63 yards to Kamara's 45. However, Kamara did get the rushing touchdown. He was on the field for the goal line, a couple goal line carries. And then obviously he outproduced Ingram in the pass game as well. Kamara 8 targets, caught 7 of them for 31 yards and a 2nd touchdown, whereas Ingram only caught all 3 of his targets, but only 29 yards. So both RBs obviously well worth the play, but I think it's obvious which one is the more valuable running back here. And you look at Michael Thomas, their number 1 receiver. He's a beast. You're playing him, 81 yards last week. So although the Saints, they give up the 5th fewest receiving yards to running backs, they are in the top 7 for fewest fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks and wide receivers. You're still playing your stars on this Saints offense. They're all awesome. You got to play them. The stars will have to be stars for the Saints to get a win at home against the Rams, and playing in New Orleans definitely helps them. So that wraps it up for the Rams-Saints game, and that wraps it up for part 1 of the Week 9 edition of the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast. So me and Paul are going to take a minute, probably going to go downstairs, grab another slice of pizza, have a beer, and we're going to come back at you with part 2 with the remaining 8 games that we have on the slate here. Some awesome matchups to go through, and some fun games on the horizon, including the Packers-Patriots game, which should be freaking
It's
awesome.
going to be an entertaining Sunday night matchup.
And we are back with part 2 of the Week 9 episode of the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast. I had a couple slices of pizza. Paul, what'd you think of the pizza?
It was tasty. That is some good homemade pizza.
Yeah, shout out to Carlita. She made some awesome pizza for us this evening. And we're going to jump right into it with a NFC South matchup of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers playing the Carolina Panthers, who, as I mentioned earlier, Panthers have an absolutely beautiful matchup here, pretty much at every single position.
Yeah, if you like extra touchdowns with your fantasy pie, then this is definitely the matchup for you. The Buccaneers, Carolina Panthers, return of Fitzmagic. So let's see what Tampa Bay can look like with Fitz back at the helm. Let's see if he can recapture some of that early magic that he had in week 1. I would be a little apprehensive that Carolina would let him do that with the defense that they have. It's a lot different than the Saints defense that Fitzpatrick went up earlier and embarrassed in the beginning of the week, or the beginning of the season. But we'll see what Fitzmagic can do. I think he immediately makes the Tampa Bay offense better. Guys like Mike Evans, they're always going to be the target getters and the touchdown and point getters, but Mike Evans gets even better. Chris Godwin becomes more relevant. Deshaun Jackson requested a trade when Jameis took the job back over. Now it's Fitzmagic again. They didn't trade Deshaun Jackson. So, again, he could be someone that if he's deep on your roster or on the waiver wire, you might use him as bye-week help. On the Carolina Panthers side of the ball, Cam, Christian McCaffrey, Greg Olsen, DJ Moore, Devin Funchess, all the Panthers, start them all. The Buccaneers defense is absolutely terrible. They let up the second most points to tight ends, third most to receivers, 10th most to running backs, and they're allowing the most to quarterbacks. And Cam Newton is already a top point scorer when it comes to fantasy production. So I would say any Carolina Panther that you have on your roster, I would be starting him. The big waiver wire guy that you could go out and get is DJ Moore, who I just mentioned. He had a big week last week. Seems to be coming on pretty strong. I think Torrey Smith is a little banged up for the Panthers. So DJ Moore, that exciting rookie that they drafted pretty high, they obviously have big plans for him within the offense. I think he's the type of receiver that fits the scheme well in terms of underneath routes, intermediate, deep. He can really make a lot happen after the catch, and I think that's what the Carolina Panthers set their offense up to do. So they play really well at home, the Panthers do. They should have another good day this Sunday when the Buccaneers come to town. And Funchess and DJ Moore could be your immediate wide receiver help when it comes to bye weeks.
Yeah, I also like in this game, whichever tight end you want to go with. I think it's kind of a coin flip there. We were talking a little earlier about which tight end does better with Fitz, and it's kind of fluctuated, especially throughout this year. O.J. Howard or Cameron Brate. So if you're looking for a tight end, the Panthers are giving up the second most fantasy points to tight ends. And, with Ryan Fitzpatrick taking over at quarterback, could see some big numbers for those tight ends in that game.
And it really is a coin flip because you look at O.J. Howard, he's obviously the more athletic receiving style tight end. But then you always hear as soon as they throw a pass to each other that Fitzmagic and Cameron Brate are both Harvard guys. So it's tough to choose between the two of them. I would almost lean more O.J. Howard just because, again, he's more of the receiving style tight end. But if they get down in the red zone, then they're going to look to Cameron Brate just because he's one of the bigger bodies and they're going to have him on the field. And Fitz has that Harvard connection with him.
Yeah. Going to the last NFC South team, we got the Falcons playing the Washington Redskins. The Falcons defense, holy crap, you are bad. Most fantasy points to quarterbacks and wide receivers, second most fantasy points to running backs. Also giving up the most receptions and the second most receiving yards to running backs. They're in the 10th most to tight ends as well. They're just all around bad. So start all your Redskins. Another group of wide receivers that could maybe be bye week replacement for you are all these wide receivers on the Redskins that maybe throughout the season won't really be very good plays, but with the bye NATO and with the matchup, maybe this is the week to get those guys in your lineup. The guy who I really like is Chris Thompson if he's healthy. As I mentioned, the Falcons are really allowing a lot to these pass-catching running backs, and that is Chris Thompson's forte. So if he doesn't play, Adrian Peterson, 150 yards last week on 26 carries, had a touchdown running the ball, had a touchdown catching the ball. He's another great play this week, and obviously Jordan Reed, 12 targets last week. This is such a weird season for him because we've been waiting for years for this dude to be consistent when it comes to his health. He's finally healthy, and for whatever reason, it just seems like he is no longer that massive wide receiver / tight end, and he just looks like a normal tight end now, which is weird. So maybe they can all the targets that he's been getting, he can finally turn this into a big fantasy production day for us with the Falcons defense against tight ends not very good. And like I said earlier, Alex Smith, if you're really hurting at quarterback, you need a replacement for one of those 3 top guys that we mentioned on bye this week. Again, this is an awesome matchup, and Alex Smith could maybe have one of these huge games that we saw him have a lot of last year that we haven't really seen him have any of this year. So moving on to the Bears playing at the Bills.
The Bears.
The Bears, yes.
The Bears. Did you see Mitch last week came to the stadium in one of the Dick short sleeve sweater vests
with the Bears written across
the Bears across the front like they wore in that SNL skit.
Pretty awesome sweater.
He's embracing it pretty well, and I think it seems to be fitting in quite nicely there.
He's a freaking huge quarterback, man. It's
big boy.
I know. I thought Cam was like a man amongst boys, and then I was watching the highlights of that Jets Bears game, and I really realized holy crap, that dude is freaking huge, man. So and he's getting it done in the running game, isn't he?
He certainly is. That one play that he ran around for 8 seconds all over the field against the Patriots, and then finally threw the touchdown. Yeah. He ran 8 yards for the touchdown.
Yeah.
Ended up running 30 or so yards in the play. He's been exciting to watch. I don't particularly love him this week. The Bills are letting up the 4th fewest points to quarterbacks and wide receivers, so you might want to avoid Mitch and company. I know Allen Robinson's banged up. Taylor Gabriel seems like he needs that other piece across from him to really be productive.
Yeah.
And Terry Cohen, we talked about him earlier. He was really just one big boom play away from having a bust of an afternoon. And Jordan Howard seems to be really emerging as the lead back and getting the carries that he's supposed to get as the lead back. They should be up in this game, so Jordan Howard could be someone that you could play just to get those end of the game, salt away the game rushing yards. But Bears that I'm definitely going to start this week is their defense. It's Nathan Peterman, the please just take the ball from me because I don't want to have it anymore interception machine, and they're giving up the most points as an entire team. So all of the quarterbacks that they've had back there, the Bills are giving up the most points to opposing defenses. They're also giving up the 5th most points to kickers. I think that speaks to teams just have success moving the ball against them, whether that's running the ball or passing the ball. No one really stands out in particular, but the kickers are always going to be the ones putting it through the posts at the end, whether they're in field goal range or after a touchdown. So
right.
If you need a kicker, Bears kicker, I think is it Cody Parkey?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, we'll get to that name in a minute. On the Bills side of the ball, not in love with anyone on that team. It's Nathan Peterman, so he's going to have a hard time getting the ball to some of those targets that they have down there, and Kelvin Benjamin and Clay. What's the tight end's name?
Which team? I'm sorry.
Bills tight end.
Oh, Charles Clay.
Charles
right.
Clay.
Yeah.
So Benjamin, Clay, I mean, they're talented guys, but Nathan Peterman is going to be able to get them the ball. LaShawn McCoy to me is the only fantasy relevant player on the Bills, but the Bears are only letting up the third. The Bears are letting up the 3rd fewest points to running backs. So a LaShawn McCoy, a Chris Ivory worry me a lot this week. The game is in Buffalo. They played a really tough 3 quarters on Monday night against the Patriots. I think that probably spent them because it was a divisional game. It was Big Brother, the division, and the Patriots. I don't think they're going to have a lot of answers for the Bears this week. So Bears defense playing them. Bears kicker.
It is Cody Parkey.
Cody Parkey.
Right, so
I'm putting Cody Parkey out there as well if he's on my team. So those are the Bears that I'm after.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. I'm moving to the other game that I'm super excited about, the Sunday night football game here. We got the Packers playing the Patriots. The Packers defense, not all that bad. And the Patriots defense, not all that great. So it should be a very high-scoring game. As I said, the Packers giving up the 10th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, 7th fewest to tight ends, and they're actually giving up the 6th fewest receptions to running backs. So with this weird Patriots offense where a running back is leading the team in targets, 13 targets again for James White last week, and we saw Cordell Patterson, a wide receiver, led the team in carries. So a very Patriot thing to do. Confused the shit out of it. Sorry about that. Confused the hell out of everybody. And so yeah, we're looking at James White last week, 10 receptions on his 13 targets at 80 yards, and he did get the rushing touchdown on one of his 8 carries. They're just spreading the ball around everywhere. We got Edelman with 10 targets, Gronk with 8, Gordon with 6. Definitely, we are seeing Philip Dorsett become more and more uninvolved, not even targeted last week. Chris Hogan had two targets, caught them both for 50 yards. So this is it's an offense where they're spreading the ball around, and I think you can start any one of those wide receivers, at least Gordon and Edelman for sure. And Gronk has really been disappointing this year. I feel like he's probably going to go down if it continues this way. He's probably going to go down as the biggest bust of the year. Besides those 2 running backs that were drafted top 10 that haven't really done anything this season in Leonard Fournette and Dalvin Cook. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, not the greatest matchup for these Patriots, but, I mean, you're going to play them because they're Patriots. So, looking at the Packers and the Patriots defense that they're going to be playing, Patriots giving up the 8th most fantasy points to both quarterbacks and running backs. They're giving up the 4th most receptions and 4th most receiving yards to running backs. So, again, it's all setting up for another awesome game for Aaron Jones coming in without Ty Montgomery there to vulture any of those passing down targets. Again, 12 attempts last week with a touchdown. He looked great. Devontae Adams, obviously you're going to play him. But as we know, the Patriots like to take away what you do best, and I think that is the biggest threat for the Patriots is Devontae Adams. So I have a feeling that we may see maybe not the greatest game from him, but it should open things up for any one of these young wide receivers for the Green Bay Packers, and Geronimo Allison, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and
Equiminius St. Brown.
Thank God you're here, Paul, because I was about to butcher that one, man. So, yeah, it should open things up for one of these younger wide receivers for the Packers. This should be an awesome game. Little side note, Jimmy Graham only caught 1 of 4 targets for 21 yards. He's becoming what seems like less and less more involved, even though Aaron Rodgers a couple weeks ago said that we need to get him more involved. So we'll see what happens with that. The Patriots giving up the 5th most fantasy points to tight end. So maybe this is a week where they do focus on getting Jimmy Graham
week to start
more involved. Yeah, right. Why not? Let's move on to another NFC North game. We got 2 NFC North matchups.
Yeah, this is a divisional showdown here between the Lions going to Minnesota and playing the Vikings. My stardoms. Minnesota has a really good defense. Hasn't played like it normally does, but I think they're shutting down offenses the way you would expect them to fantasy-wise. Just look at Drew Brees last week. So on the Detroit side, the only person that I would definitely start this week if he's on your roster or someone that you want to play just the matchup, Matt Prater. The Vikings are giving up the 4th most points 2 fantasy kickers. So again,
You must have a kicker on bye this week, don't you?
I don't know if I do. I have Greg Zuerlein and Justin Tucker, so I'm okay this week. But I'm just a guy that I like keeping an eye on the kicker matchups and the
Kickers
defenses.
are people too, right?
They get points. Everyone gets points. So you gotta remember that. You only get so many starting spots, and a kicker is one of them. So maximize at the margins where you can. Matt Prater, Vikings are giving up the 4th most fantasy points. I talked about it earlier with the other matchup. Vikings have a good defense, but the ball can be moved against them. The kicker's the one that's putting it through the posts at the end of the drive. So Matt Prater is my Vikings guy. I'm keeping an eye on Kenny Galladay and Marvin Jones without Golden Tate being there. If you need the bye week help, it's all we're talking about this episode because of Bye Mageddon and the Bye NATO that has hit our small town of Fantasyville. But Kenny Galladay, Marvin Jones are the lead dogs now without Golden Tate there. Golden Tate was pulling in over 90 catches for the last 4 years. Someone has to replace that.
Yeah, it's a lot of production.
So these guys are definitely in line for a lot of work. Matt Stafford hasn't fared particularly well against the Minnesota Vikings. He averages right around 250 yards in 16 career games against the Vikings, and he's throwing less than 2 touchdown passes a game. He has 23 total touchdown passes against the Minnesota Vikings, and again, that's over 16 career games. So a little apprehensive about Matt Stafford in this game, but again, if you need help, if you need someone to play during a bye, Matt Stafford is pretty much their offense because they still haven't really started to rely on the running game like most of us would have expected them to. On the Vikings side of the ball, Latavius Murray, if Dalvin Cook doesn't go, and Kyle Rudolph are my most interesting plays for this week. The Lions are letting up the 5th most fantasy points to running backs and the 8th most to tight ends. I say they're my most interesting because I don't think people would necessarily think to start them if they have other players on their roster. You're obviously starting Adam Thielen. He's going, I'm pretty sure, to break the Megatron record this week of consecutive games with over 100 yards receiving. Pretty interesting that he's doing it against Megatron's former team. So let's see what this week turns into with Adam Thielen record hunting, and the team of whose record he's hunting is the Lions and Megatron's former team. So that's how I feel about the Lions and Vikings this week.
Who would have ever said that we would be talking about Adam Thielen
Hunting a Megatron record.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Like 5'9" white guy, Calvin Johnson, a.k.a. Megatron. It doesn't seem to make sense.
All the proof in the world that it does not matter how big you are, especially if you're a wide receiver in this NFL. If you can run a route and you can get open, you're going to catch passes and you're going to put up numbers. So all you youngsters out there, don't be discouraged if you're one of these smaller dudes. Look at Julian Edelman. He's been killing it too. So
size doesn't matter.
Yeah. We are going to go over to the AFC East now. We got the Jets playing the Dolphins. The Jets here, a lot of guys that have been very inconsistent this season, including Mr. Crowell. Last week he had 13 attempts and only 25 yards. Not a very good average there. But with but with Powell being down, he should see more work as the season continues. So maybe this is another week that you can plug him in, especially with buys. Plus, the Dolphins are giving up the 4th most fantasy points to running back, so it's probably the best matchup in this game. Another possible quarterback bye week replacement, Sam Darnold. The Dolphins, their one strength of this defense is against quarterbacks, but over the past couple weeks, they've been really they have not looked good on defense. So maybe Darnold, maybe you can play him this week and feel okay about it. Jermaine Kearse last week, 10 targets. He's obviously the number 1 wide receiver there now with Quincy Nunwa still hurt and Terrell Pryor gone. Just got signed by the Bills, as Paul just mentioned earlier. And Robbie Anderson with bye weeks, this could be a dart throw if you're really, really struggling for filling a wide receiver
definition
spot.
Of boom or bust.
Yep.
So you're praying for a boom week.
And he's apparently still, I think he's still listed as questionable. So obviously another guy you're going to have to keep an eye on as far as inactives come right before the Sunday games start. And the guy that I mentioned in my DFS lineup, Chris Herndon, like I said, 3 straight games now with a touchdown. Could be another sneaky play at tight end with the Dolphins' absolutely putrid defense. On the Dolphins side of the ball, the split between the 2 running backs couldn't have been any more even. They each got 12 attempts. They each got targeted twice. However, Kenyon Drake turned it into 2 touchdowns with just about 100 total yards, and Frank Gore only about 60 total yards. So obviously, I think Drake is obviously the more talented guy, but it's still going to be split like this, so can't really count on either one of them, I feel like, for any more than a flex. Maybe this week you can count on Drake as an RB2 with the buys going on and all that. But again, it's just one of these splits where you're just going to have to deal with it all season. And like I said in the DFS segment, again, these 2 wide receivers, they're playing the Jets defense, which are giving up the 9th most fantasy points to wide receivers. So Devontae Parker, who had an awesome game last week, caught 6 of his 9 targets for 134 yards. With all these injuries that the Dolphins are dealing with at wide receiver, it's pretty much him and Amendola, and that's it. So, again, Amendola, 5 of 6 from last week, 43 yards. Did have that passing, through the touchdown to Drake, which helped his numbers out big time. But I think those are the guys to play from the Dolphins lineup in this AFC East game against the New York Jets. So next we got what used to be one of my favorite games of the year. Awesome that we got 2 of them every year, and it is the Pittsburgh Steelers playing the Baltimore Ravens.
Down in Baltimore, the Ravens have one of the, probably, if not one of the best fantasy defenses in the league. They are not letting up points to anyone. Their tops really across the board in every category. I don't know if we have the complete numbers for you here.
Fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, fewest fantasy points to running backs, fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. And what do you know? They're giving up the fewest fantasy points to tight ends as well. And in case you wanted to know any more about this Ravens defense, they're also giving up the fewest receptions and receiving yards to running backs. So it's not even like pass-catching running backs in PPR leagues can survive against this Ravens defense.
So need we say more? We'll tell you more. Don't worry. I am still not going to sit Big Ben, Antonio Brown, or Juju, even though the Ravens are that good across the board defense-wise. The Steelers really own this division. If you look at matchups in years past, they still will beat the Ravens when needed. And on the Ravens side of the ball, I think their offense, they're all viable plays this week, considering some of the bye weeks across the board. The Steelers give up the 5th most points to quarterbacks, the 7th most points to wide receivers, and the 4th most to tight ends. I can't see the Steelers getting blown out. So if the Ravens start to score a lot, the Steelers are going to be scoring a lot. So that's why I'm still playing Big Ben, still playing Antonio Brown and Juju if I have any of them on my team.
Yeah, the Steelers are just too explosive to sit anybody.
Right. James Conner would be the one guy that I do sit. The Ravens are giving up the fewest points, as we just mentioned, to running backs. The first meeting this season, because this is the second of the 2 meetings, the first meeting in Pittsburgh, James Conner in standard leagues only scored 6.4 points. So the Ravens held true and shut him down running the ball. I think that's one thing that you really can't fake. If you stop the run, you stop the run.
Right.
Passing the ball and scoring the ball is an entirely different story. So that's why I'm playing my quarterback and receivers on the Steelers side. And I feel good about Flacco, Crabtree, John Brown, Willie Snead. Hayden Hurst is a kind of interesting tight end prospect here. I mean, he was their number 1 pick before Lamar Jackson was taken in the first round this year. He's number 3 on the depth chart right now for tight ends, but you saw him play a lot in garbage time last week when they were getting blown out by the Carolina Panthers. There's someone that the Ravens are obviously very high on. They like to use a lot of tight end formations, so Hayden Hurst could be an interesting person just to keep your eye on. I wouldn't necessarily pick him up yet, but watch him this week, watch him next week, and see what he starts to develop into. Alex Collins, Buck Allen, now Ty Montgomery. I'm not interested in any of them this week. The Steelers are letting up the fourth fewest fantasy points to running backs, so I'm not touching the Ravens' backfield. I'm not touching the Steelers' backfield. I'm focused on quarterbacks and wide receivers in this matchup.
Yeah, in the one league that I have, I have Zach Ertz in 2 leagues, but I need to replace him in both of them, obviously, and I'm torn between picking up Hayden Hurst or not, because I was excited about him coming into the league. I know how much Joe Flacco likes his tight end, and as we said,
who doesn't?
The Steelers are giving up the third most fantasy points to tight ends. So Hayden Hurst did have a touchdown, albeit it was thrown to him by Lamar Jackson last week, but I think he is not a bad buy replacement tight end. Like with tight ends, I mean, we can give you the numbers of who gives up the most and the fewest points to tight ends, but it doesn't matter. We saw, as I mentioned, with to pour one out, CJ Uzomah had the best matchup of tight ends last week and did absolutely nothing. So who the hell knows what's going on with the tight end position? But I mean, a huge body on a team that has historically targeted their tight ends in the red zone, I think he's not the worst play you can go for. And the last game we have here is 2 teams coming off of a bye. The Tennessee Titans going to Dallas to play the Cowboys. Not really much to say in this game besides, obviously, it's going to be really cool to see Amari Cooper with a star on the side of his helmet for you Cowboy fans out there. So we'll see how they incorporate him into their offense. You know, Jerry Jones had been quoted a couple weeks ago saying that they don't have a number one receiver and they haven't had one in years. So we'll see if they turn him into their number one receiver or if he continues his ways for the past over a year now, considering this season and last season with how inconsistent Amari Cooper has been. However, I do think that this will finally help pull maybe one guy out of the box for Zeke Elliott, where he won't be facing 9-man boxes every play. So hopefully that does help Zeke a little bit, and also it should help open up some things for the tight end that they have down there. What's his name?
Swamey, Jeff Geoff.
Yeah.
Swame.
And also for wide receiver Cole. So yeah, should the signing or the trade there should help everybody else on that team. And as far as the Titans go, I mean, I don't know if there's anybody else you can play besides Dion Lewis with any kind of confidence. And really the only reason why I say that is because the Cowboys are giving up the 6th most receptions to running backs. And that's obviously what Dion Lewis did so well with the Patriots last year. It's what we thought he was going to be doing so well this year with the Titans. It just hasn't really worked out so far. So maybe they come off of a bye. Maybe Marcus Mariota can finally feel the other 2 fingers on his hand, and maybe they decide to start utilizing these running backs a little better. And maybe you can get a solid RB2, maybe a flex play out of Dion Lewis, who's probably been cut in more leagues than not.
They gave the Chargers a run for their money over in London a couple weeks ago.
Yeah,
and
if it wasn't for such a horrible play call.
a ridiculous go for 2 instead of just tie the game.
Yeah, it's one thing that we didn't get a chance to talk to because of our bye on our bye week. But yeah, that was just a wild end of a game and just a absolutely boneheaded call, which to me says to your defense, as Mike Vrabel, an awesome defensive player in his time, and also was one of these first guys that we saw a defensive player line up as a tight end and go catch touchdown passes.
Mm-hmm.
But to just blatantly tell your defense, I have zero confidence in you whatsoever to stop Phillip Rivers on a 30-second last-minute drive to go kick a field goal. Yeah, that was absurd for them to do that. But hey,
I mean, you can get away with it.
Coach.
You can get away with it. I think it's fun to see that these first-year coaches are being aggressive. Frank Reich, a couple weeks prior,
same thing. Yeah, you're right.
Going for 2 or going for it in his own territory in overtime, not getting it and losing the game. Now you have Vrabel doing it over in London. It's exciting that people are being so aggressive and trying to adopt this mentality, but I don't see too many 2nd or 3rd-year head coaches that want to keep their job.
Yeah, right.
Making these same calls. So
yeah, as a fantasy football guy, any chance that we get for more fantasy production, I'm
overtime.
all for it. Overtime is great, and we've seen more overtime this season than I feel like I've seen in my entire life.
Yeah,
especially with the Browns. So So yeah, from a fantasy football perspective, it was awesome. But from a just a football mindset, I don't get it.
Weird.
But that's the Tennessee Titans season this year, you know. And that does it for the Week 9 episode of the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast. Paul, I want to thank you for joining me on this
pleasure
episode.
as always.
And to our fans out there, again, I apologize for us missing out last week. You know, life sometimes gets in the way. But we are here for the rest of the season. We are here to give you, hopefully, all the stats you need. Hopefully, some educated guesses and some good insight into the games for each week. So good luck this week, and I hope that the fantasy gods are cruel to your opponents.
The birds.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast. To listen to our episodes or chat with us live, download the official Dudes and Beer app, available on Android and iDevices, or visit us online at dudesnbeer-com. You can also find all of our episodes on Breach.tv, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, SoundCloud, or your favorite podcast service. Dudes and Beer is a proud member of the HC Universal family of podcasts. For more about our sponsors, podcasts, and other content, visit hcuniversalnetwork.com or download the free HC Universal Network app. Thanks for listening, everybody. And until next time, drink responsibly.